Hello, everyone. So I just want to thank everybody on this call for the really fascinating presentations and participation so far in the retreat. It's my and Rohir's treat now to introduce our panel discussion, which is going to be about career transitions. I'm a postdoc in Daniel Rubin's lab, co-advised by Asha Lizadeh in oncology. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Rohir to introduce himself and ask our first panelist to do so as well.
Thank you, Natasha. For those who don't know me, I'm Rogier van der Sluis. I'm a postdoc at the AIMI Center. I'm supervised by Kurt Langlaats and co-supervised by Akshay Chaudhari. I started my postdoc during the pandemic, so I'm really thrilled to meet many of you for the first time tomorrow. And as Natasha already said, we're very excited to moderate this session on career transitions. We have 5 great panelists today with various different backgrounds, including academia, industry, and entrepreneurship. At the start of the session, we will give each panelist the opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we will proceed with various questions to learn from their career decisions. The last 20 minutes of the sessions are reserved for questions from the audience, so make sure to post your questions in the chat during the conversation. So let's kick this session off with the introduction. Akshay, could you start to introduce yourself? And while doing so, can you give us a short overview of your current and previous positions in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for Natasha and Rohir for having me on this panel. So I'll try to give a quick summary of how I got to where I am without trying to bore everyone in the process. So I started off with an undergraduate degree in bioengineering, which was at UC San Diego. And over there, I tried to get involved in as many different types of research. I did some research in systems biology, some biosensors, and got into medical imaging only over the last 2 or 3 months. But I realized, wow, this is really cool. There's a lot of technology that's involved with it, and there's a lot of room for clinical application, which is what inspired me to go to graduate school right after my undergrad to work on my PhD. My high school and my undergrad was in California, and I realized I did not want to leave the nice sun and the nice weather, so I decided to stick around, and I just moved up north to Stanford, and I have been here ever since. I started on my PhD in 2012. I wrapped up in 2017. That was in the bioengineering department. And I probably did what everyone would recommend you not to do, which is to stay more or less within the same group for my postdoc right after my PhD too. And my reasoning was I really enjoyed the people. I really enjoyed the research. So I didn't want to change for the sake of changing. I did decide to teach myself a completely new set of skills. My PhD was primarily focused on MRI acquisition, but I figured that my goal for my postdoc would be to try to become an expert in machine learning. So that's what I've been trying to do over the last few years. So that's how I justified not moving, but at least moving to a different research area. And during that time, I was still pretty confused about what I wanted to do with my life. I wasn't sure if I wanted to stick around in academics or go to industry. So I tried to have a little bit of both at the same time. That's when I started consulting with different companies just to see what life might be like on the other side without necessarily committing one way or the other. And I think that was a really valuable experience for me because being in industry was nothing that I had done previously. So it gave me a sense of what the day-to-day life might look like. And I ended up realizing that I really enjoy pure research a little bit more. I think there's definitely value in creating products and bringing them to the market. But my interests are more on the asking why questions and spending more months than one needs to trying to answer those why-based questions. So that's why I decided to stick around, and I became an instructor at Stanford. And last October, I transitioned to an assistant professor. So that's my journey where I didn't really rock the boat too much and just stayed in the same place.
That is fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, and we look forward to hearing more from you very soon. Dr. Rusu, why don't you go next?
I think my training, and thank you all for the invitation to talk. My training has been a little bit more into rocking the boat as much as I could. I really moved a lot. I moved across fields. I moved across industries, and I am at Stanford now. So I'm kind of happy about it. So let me tell you a little bit how I started. So I was always kind of interested in math. And as I started, I got interested in computer science. That's when I was in high school. So I decided to do a degree starting in engineering. I figured that's probably the best way to go about it. And then slowly I progressed towards biology. It's like, oh, that's interesting. How about I do that? I don't know. Sounds interesting. And then it kind of went, that's kind of the theme of my entire career and transition has been, oh, that sounds interesting. Let's move across the other ocean and the other continent. And I think throughout my career, I moved across two places in undergrad. So I did my undergrad in France and I did an engineering degree. I specialized in bioinformatics and modeling as an undergrad. Then I decided to come to United States. I did my PhD in the University of Houston in structural biology. So I don't have a medical imaging kind of training, but I do have a data analysis background. And then as I was doing the structural biology work in my PhD, I was like, ooh, medical imaging, that sounds interesting. I could probably go ahead and do something with all the skills that I got, a little bit more useful than trying to solve the structure of a protein, at least more tangible and quicker. So I did move in my postdoc in medical imaging, and I was always kind of a little bit curious what's on the other side. So I decided at the end of my postdoc to go in industry. And I spent about 3 years working for GE Global Research, as that's the R&D center of GE. And at the end of those 3 years, I decided, or essentially the opportunity came and I decided to go for it. And that was this position at Stanford. So I've been now at Stanford for 4 years. I have a lab that is ever growing. I'm very, very excited with their accomplishments and their research progress. And I'm more than happy to talk a little bit more about each of the steps that I've mentioned. I did move in US in 5 different states. I lived in 5 different states: Texas, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, and now California.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Great journey. Yuhao, you recently made a career switch. Can you tell us something more about that?
Yeah, sure, of course. So first of all, I'm very happy to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces. Hello, everyone. So my name is Yuhao. So I was a PhD student at Stanford in the biomedical informatics program. So I just graduated earlier this year in 2021 amid the pandemic. So, and then right now I'm a scientist at Amazon AWS working on general like AI solutions that we created for AI services were created for enterprises. So, but let me go from the very beginning. So I did my undergrad back in China, so it's a different country, and I also make a lot of transitions in terms of the industry or research direction. So I did my undergrad in EE. We call it electronic engineering, not electrical engineering. That's in the US. But I study a lot of the hardware and also signal processing type of thing. But during the undergrad, I was exposed to a lot of like programming and software engineering type of thing. At that time, I got to realize that I was more interested in software rather than all of the hardware type of stuff. So I made the transition when I applied for the graduate study. So I did a master study in computer science at Stanford at the beginning of my time at Stanford. So, but then during that time, I got exposed to a lot of the biomedical applications by working with a professor called Mark Newson, and as well as the professor Ross Altman in the BIMI program. So it was that time I kind of realized, oh, there are a lot of interesting applications of the AI stuff that we studied in the CS program in the biomedical field. So that got me motivated to actually apply for the PhD program in biomedical informatics. And then after I entered the PhD program, I got to know Kurt, who is also here today. I'm very happy to see him again. And my PhD was actually advised by Kurt and also co-advised by Chris Manning in the CS department. So I did my PhD in applying machine learning and natural language processing to medical text. So my thesis was on understanding and generating medical text. That was a very interesting journey for me. And also, I also spent some time working on imaging and also multimodal learning between the text modality and imaging modality. And then after I finished my PhD study, I became very curious about how AI and machine learning are actually applied across different industries. How was they applied in, for example, finance or some other industries, and how can we make the value out of it? So that's when I was opposed to some opportunities to become a research scientist at different companies, and I finally chose Amazon AWS AI. And right now we're working on enterprise level AI applications. We cover different industries. Medicine is one of them. So we actually build NLP solutions for some medical applications, but not only medicine right now. So we're also build AI solutions for example, like finance industry and other industries nowadays. Yeah, so that's my journey.
Wonderful. And next, I'd like the person to go whose work at Stanford set a really important groundwork for my own postdoc, Dr. Sarah Mattonen. Please, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks for the organizers and the invitation to speak. It's great to see so many familiar faces, as Yuhao mentioned, and it's great to be back. So yeah, I had a little bit of a windy road to get to where I am now, but I can give you a little bit of a background. So I'm from Canada, Ontario, Canada, so just outside Toronto. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Western Ontario, which is in London, so just west of Toronto. And during my undergraduate degree, I kind of took a little bit of everything. I ended up with a degree in medical sciences, so it was a little bit broad. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I kind of knew I always wanted to do something with cancer. So I decided at the end of my undergraduate degree, I was going to switch gears a little bit, and I went and did a degree in clinical radiation therapy. So I trained to be a radiation therapist to treat cancer patients, and did a 3-year degree there. And as part of that program, I did a research project, and that's really where I fell in love with the research aspect of it. So after that 3-year degree, I decided to switch gears a little bit, return back to the University of Western Ontario to do my graduate degree. So I really fell in love with the medical imaging aspect as part of that program. So then I decided, as part of my graduate studies, I was offered a project looking at image analysis and machine learning applications in medical imaging. So I jumped on that and kind of switched gears a little bit to do more of the programming, and started out there with that. And then did my PhD at the University of Western Ontario again. So as you'll notice, London kind of keeps coming back. I go back and forth between London and other places. And as Akshay mentioned, I got the advice that if I ever wanted to return to London, I needed to go somewhere else to do a postdoc. So I ended up looking at different postdoc opportunities and decided to do a postdoc with Sandy at Stanford. So I did that from 2017 to 2019. And I always knew I kind of wanted to end up back as an academic. So I started applying for positions, and lucky enough, got a position back at Western University in London. And I've been an assistant professor there for the past 2 years, since July 2019. So I look forward to discussing it more shortly.
Thank you. It's great to hear so many different stories already. And there's one more left. Nish, you already talked a bit about your company, but can you give us a bigger overview of how your career path went?
Of course. Thanks a lot for having me here. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I did my undergraduate and graduate studies at Stanford. I came in in 2013. And in my sophomore year of undergrad, there was a new class offered by Fei Lee's group called CS231N. And I decided to take that, which is deep learning for computer vision. And back then it was only 100 people. Now usually it goes for 700 people a quarter. So it's grown dramatically since then. But after taking the class, my goal was to get an office on the second floor of Gates, which is the computer vision lab at Stanford. And during the course of doing research in those labs, there was an AI salon hosted by Professor Vijay Pandey, who's a biophysics professor at Stanford, now a venture capitalist. And he mentioned how AI for medical imaging was a solved technical problem but was not actually something that had seen the light at the end of the tunnel. And that was very unsettling for me as a realization, where the technology seemed close enough, but there seemed to be no efforts to be taking those algorithms into clinical practice. And really just, I was trying to understand what were the bottlenecks. Coincidentally, that in those months, there was an email sent out by Chris Ray's group asking for research collaborators who were interested in coming up with weak supervision techniques to efficiently extract labels from radiology reports to label radiology images. And I took on that position, and I really enjoyed my time there. And at the end, we published our papers, realized that, okay, it seems like getting labels efficiently is no longer going to be a bottleneck for developing new algorithms. And around that time, ChexNet also came out. And so did the Bone Age paper from Dr. Halabi and Dr. Larson's group. And that really spun up another thread in me, which was, okay, now that these algorithms, at least they're proof of concept algorithms, what's really stopping them from being used in practice? And that led to my friend and I reaching out to Dr. Langlotz to see what it would take for Stanford Hospital to start using the algorithms that were developed by us during the course of our research, and also ones that were built by other folks in the AIMI Center actually into clinical practice. And that led to my friend and I organizing a randomized control trial for one of the algorithms that Stanford had built. Realized that it was incredibly painful to work with multiple institutions and collaborate. And that led to the formation of the company. So I guess I did change a lot of hats, but in the end, I have been interested in AI for medical imaging since roughly 2016 now. But I've been wearing multiple hats and changing those hats every now and then.
Excellent. So now that we've gotten to meet each of you in a little bit of detail, we'd like to delve a little bit deeper into your personal journeys in getting to where you are today. And so I'll open up this question to anyone on the panel who would like to start. How did you prepare yourself for the career path you chose? And what other options did you consider at the time? And I guess just to dovetail off of that, I do see a question from Sandy Nepal in the chat as well, which mentions, how did you know you made the right choices for you? So a few different questions floating around here, but I invite anyone to begin.
I'm happy to take a stab. Maybe I can start
Sure.
with Sandy's question first about how did I know that I made the right choice for me? I never did. I always felt that it's an exploration process, and the only thing I can control is who are the people that are around me. Do I enjoy working with these people, and am I happy in the short term? I don't think I can predict what will happen in 5, 6, 10 years time. So the only thing that I can control is my immediate future. What are some of the projects and the people that I work with, and trying to make a bet on that. So I always knew that I'd made the right choice retrospectively because things just worked out in the long run. But besides that, there's no wrong decision, and there's always different decisions that you can make. And sometimes you just have to go with your gut feeling and do what seems most exciting for you.
Maybe I can follow up to Akshay's point there. I, like him, I don't think I ever know whether this is the right decision or it has been the right decision. But I can tell you a little bit of how I made my mind about some of these decisions. One of them was kind of as I was attempting to finish my PhD, I was thinking about what's going to follow for me, right? I could have the choice between going to a postdoc or not, or go to a different postdoc, different field. And I stayed on that thought for quite a little bit, mostly because I was scared, to be honest. I mean, going in a completely new field, it's scary because first of all, I didn't know anybody. And second of all, so I couldn't use my network very well for that. And then second of all, it's like, what if I don't make it? But one of the things that I thought about was, what do I want to be when I, quotes in quotes, grow up? So I really thought about that 5-year plan, which I hated. I hate that question in an interview. But at that moment, it was, what would I really want to do as a job? Now I'm done with the PhD. What is the job that I want to do? And that will help me do what I want to get, where I want to get with my life. And one of the things that I thought is that I want to be in an industry, or I want to be in a field where there is an industry. And my PhD didn't feel like had an industry, at least not much of it. Hence the movement towards the medical imaging. I like the medical imaging field, but the push towards it was because there was both an academia option as well as an industry option. And I obviously got to use and check both of them. So that was one moment. So I thought about what skills do I need to get to that particular job that I envisioned at that moment in my head. That was the perfect job for me. And that was, I needed skills in medical imaging. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is, once you actually get that job, how you decide is that if you accept or not accept that offer. Because again, it's a little bit unclear. And I never rushed to make that decision. I really took my time. If they gave me 2 weeks, I sat on it and I took the 2 weeks and never really thought hard about it. I just let it be in my mind and see if this is kind of, always was in the back of my mind, but is this really the decision? Is this the way I want to take it? And I kind of always went for it, but because obviously I applied for that job for a reason. But point being that it's really hard to know what the future will be. But unless you try it, you're probably going to be always worried that what if? So I don't like the what if scenarios, so I go for them.
I think that's great advice. Does anyone else wants to chime in?
I can add my perspective. So I would say that particularly to the question about making the right choice, right? So I think as a machine learning researcher, I think the right word as a metric is a little bit fuzzy. So it's not a good metric, or it's not the best metric that we can come up with. So I think everyone has a different definition for what's right? Somebody might want to optimize for the financial return, right? Which is completely legit, and it could be a good metric. And some other people, for myself, for example, I would like to optimize the metric of the happiness and the excitement for what I did or what I'm going to do, right? So I think the first thing there is to think about what is the metric that you want and the metric that you think you want to optimize for, right? So there's no like right or wrong in doing this, but rather to think about what is the more clear objective, or to measure whether you want to stay or do whatever you want to do, right? So and then for me, that's the excitement for the stuff that I was doing. So an example for me personally was I was studying EE again during my undergrad, and that was the time I realized that it's really not the industry that I want to spend most of my time on. So that's why I made the transition towards learning more about AI and software, and I feel that when I was working on AI and working on improving the algorithms for whether doing imaging or natural language processing, I can feel the excitement, and I feel like I can invest most of my time into the work that I do, and I feel happy about the work that I do. I think that's what's really driven the transitions that I have been making. So that's my personal perspective.
Wow. Yeah, that's the typical computer science way to think about it. And I think it's perfect for many of us here. So thank you for that answer. How did you, another question to all the panelists here is, how did you prepare for, when you finally found out what you wanted to do, how did you prepare yourself to get there? I heard a little bit about that from Mirabela already, but probably someone else also has some ideas about that.
Yeah, I can start us off and kind of picking up on the previous question. Yeah, so for me, I echo a lot of kind of what everybody else had said in terms of finding what I'm excited about, what I enjoy working on every day, and the people that I'm working with and the problems that I get to solve. And I think, I look back at my career trajectory, and some people could say, oh, well, why did you do radiation therapy? That was a waste of 3 years. You didn't really use it for anything. But really, I don't regret any decision that I've made. I think every path that I've taken has kind of built me as a person and kind of built my future as I've gone through, and kind of you learn from it in terms of what you like and what you don't like. So I think it's all a valuable experience. And today I work on all these radiotherapy projects, and that background has been super, super helpful. So I think you kind of build off of that. And in terms of preparing, I think for me, I knew I wanted to go into the academic path as soon as during my graduate school. And for me, what I needed to do to be successful was put myself in the best position to be successful. So finding, for me, mentors that were really invested in my success and helped me get there was a big part of it. So my PhD mentor and my postdoc mentor, obviously, in terms of getting to where I needed to be. So I think that was one important thing. Then just taking advantage of different opportunities in terms of, for me, I'll just point one thing out in terms of preparing for a faculty career. As Stanford, I think being a postdoc there provided me with so many opportunities to get to that next step. So like preparing for faculty's career course, going to different academic chats and things that were put on by the Postdoc Association also helped in terms of different steps along that academic pipeline to get to where I needed to be to get that job offer at the end.
Echoing that sentiment as well, I think it's incredibly crucial to find people to work with who are very driven and motivated and inspire you. And at the same time, also find people who not only just want to mentor you, but sponsor you. I've been really grateful to have people who have sponsored their reputation, their time and resources to allow me and my collaborators to take on projects that otherwise would not have been opportunities available to us. So I think it's a cheat code in life, and it's something that if you're lucky enough to find people to be sponsors, and there are many people on this call today who have been sponsors for my work. So yeah, if you're able to find those people, you're already on a head start there.
I'd really like to echo this sentiment of trying to find good mentors, because as I think about what skills I needed to develop, I think it always boiled down to two things: things that I knew I didn't know, and things that I didn't know that I didn't know. So I really looked to my mentors, especially starting off in the new field, to tell me, what are things that, a successful PhD student in MR imaging should know, because they're the experts, they've seen it all. And one thing that I really appreciated going over with my PIs, which were Brian Hargreaves and Gary Gold at Stanford, was every 6 months or so, we would just go over my CV and try to think about big picture perspectives as to what are my ambitions, what is working, what is not working, what are some skills I'd like to develop. So I really enjoyed having those conversations because it helped me think about the bigger picture. And when I was just starting on in my first, second, and third years, I really deferred to my PIs in trying to help me in learning new skills. Maybe it's understanding about how different pulse sequences work, or trying to understand how the reading room is. But over time, once you immerse yourself in that scenario, once you start going to a few conferences, you start seeing holes in the field that could be amenable for new research ideas. And at that point, then I could help answer, what are some good things that would be helpful for me to learn that would be impactful for the field? So I think it's a joint process where sometimes you have to defer to others, especially if they've been in the field for a long time. But at the same time, you also want to be able to put yourself out there and just try to learn about what are the problems in your field and just try to take a stab at them.
I think this is all amazing advice, and I hope I speak for everyone here by saying that I'm blown away by the feedback that's been given here, and to echo what Nish said about cheat codes, I feel like you all just handed us a lot of the cheat codes that can lead to success in these respects. So, you've all been incredibly successful in the settings that you're in currently, and I'd like to pose a different question that perhaps might be a little provocative. You've talked about your career transitions to date, but we wondered, do you see yourself making any other career transitions in the future? We've talked about leaping between academia and industry, and so I'd love to hear from any of our panelists about whether they foresee any straddling of those lines in your respective careers in the future.
I don't think I have a $1 billion idea lined up, so I foresee staying in my position for the near future. And my bosses are listening, so maybe I shouldn't say that.
So I mentioned it might be a little, a little tricky to answer, but that is totally fair.
Yeah, I think for me, I think for me personally, because I'm working on machine learning or natural language processing research, I think one advantage of being in that position or in that field is that it's not only one industry, right? So we're actually applying the same set of techniques to actually solve problems in different industries. So that naturally gives me exposure to problems in different industries. For example, the model that I build for natural language processing nowadays could make an impact in life science. Or another day, the model that I build for processing natural images that people upload in their photo booms or whatever, type of software, the same technique to process that is applicable to medical imaging. So, it naturally provides me with the opportunity to expose to different industries. So I think because of that, I don't intend to make transition in terms of the industry. Unless one day we see that machine learning is dying and is not a thing anymore, I think that's going to be another story. But as of today, I think, I don't see myself going to make the transition into different industries. Yeah.
Maybe I can follow up. So on my side, I think my big point is that I would like to save one life. That's one of my goals and has been for a few years now. And I'm not yet there. I don't think my research has saved or helped save a life, which is a big word, save, but at least improve. So from my perspective, whatever gets me there, I will probably go for it. And it will probably be somewhere at the border of the two, because I do think both have advantages and disadvantages. And then I will make sure that I'll find a path that allows me to get there.
Yeah, I think it's also possible to have in-career transitions while holding the same position. So in my job, I've gone from being an AI researcher to a software developer to a clinical research coordinator to someone who interacts with the FDA to someone who now talks to heads of AI departments at hospitals, and my title hasn't changed. So it's possible by being an entrepreneur or running a small company, you'll be wearing multiple hats all simultaneously and in different occasions. So you get to dabble with the.
Yeah, so another question we would like to ask you is that if you knew you would spend some time of your career as an academic and also in the industry, where would you start? Would you rather start in the industry, or would you rather start as an academic? So would you do a postdoc? Would you consider not doing it? You probably have some thoughts on that.
I certainly have some thoughts and some input, but I don't know if anybody else wants to take it. Otherwise, I can certainly add some stuff. All right, maybe I'll go. My suggestion is you have to be a little bit careful about switching though back and forth between industry and academia, especially very early in life, because they reward different things and they require different things. So if you want to stay in academia, publications are absolutely vital for your progression in academia, and without those you can't get those positions. So if you do go in industry early as a postdoc, so I did a postdoc, I went after my postdoc and then moved into Stanford after. I was able to publish a little bit in my industry job, but nothing compared to how much probably appear in an academic postdoc longer than I would have published around the same time. So publications remain quite important. And while in some industries you can publish, and at my company I could have, I still didn't have enough time to really work on my projects and publish at the same time. And and at the same time, there are industries where you cannot publish. That's part of some of the issues. And you don't work on things that are easily publishable because that might not necessarily be as easy of a project, or it's not the types of things you work in industry are quite different than in academia. So as you are doing and thinking about going into one or the other, think a little bit about what's rewarded. And probably the reason why I jumped from industry quite quickly after being in it for 3 years was because I did realize that if I stay a lot longer, I'm going to close the doors towards academia, just because my publication record was kind of going a little down. And I'm just not, compared to other peers the same rank as me, I just won't be competitive. So that's my suggestion there. But again, I think it also depends a lot on what type of industry you go. So GE Global Research was a very established company, which allowed me to publish. Yeah.
I want to add a little bit on top of Dr. Rusu's points on publication and being competitive in terms of publication. So I think one point I want to add is, if you want to be competitive in terms of publication to optimize your future career, whether that's going to be academic or that's going to be industry research role, right? So I think academic is actually a really good place to do that. And one perspective or one reason for that is collaboration. So I think this is especially true after I make the transition from being a PhD student to being an academic industry researcher. So in industry, collaborations across institutions are actually harder than when you do so in academic. So think about, like, if you're in Stanford and you want to collaborate with someone from Berkeley, or if you want to collaborate with someone from Microsoft or Amazon or Google or GE, that's actually much, much easier and has a lower barrier than if you want to do so from Amazon. So imagine like Amazon collaborating with Microsoft on some research project. So it's almost impossible. So I wouldn't say that it's definitely impossible, but it's much, much, much harder to do so. So I think that's one perspective to keep in mind if it's something that you really care about.
This is all, again, very helpful feedback. And just before we move on from this question, any other takers? Anyone else want to chime in?
Sure, I can chime in quickly here. I try not to think about it as strictly industry versus academia, because even within industry, you can have so many different types of roles. You could be a software engineer and your job is to just ship products every quarter, or you could be working at Google Brain where your job is to keep publishing every quarter. So I try to bring the question back to what sort of skills can you actually develop? And actually one of the most academically useful roles that I had actually came when I was consulting for a company, when I was working in a marketing role too. My job was to sell MR hardware. And the way I would do that was to just go to different academic MR sites and just talk to the researchers and ask them, what are your problems? How are you solving them now? And how will you solve them in the future? Most of the time, I didn't have any background about these problems, but I really learned the skills of trying to understand the problem from the very beginning and try to think about the solution from an end-to-end basis. And as an academic, I think that just translates to grant writing, just being able to tell a very compelling story. And I found that I learned those skills best from an industry position. So I think the answer can vary, and it all comes down to developing a useful skill set.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Okay, I wasn't sure anybody was hearing me. Akshay mentioned when he was speaking that he would go over his CV every 6 months with his mentors. So I would ask all of the postdocs and engineers in the audience now, do you actually even have a CV yet? Because I would bet not everybody does. And I think it's a very important practical thing to start getting your CV in shape, list everything you do, put it in the right section. And if you want to wind up in academics, for instance, then you have a document with which to work. So very important practical advice suggested by Akshay.
And I would echo that just to say, again, a lot of the feedback here has been very practical, but also I think it's very valuable to us as trainees and to this audience in general to just hear the versatility and diversity of perspectives here. Because again, all of you come from fascinatingly different backgrounds, but I think, all of this is very helpful to hear. And with that, we'd like to shift gears from questions for all of you, maybe to some targeted questions with the time that we have remaining. So I will open up with the first question that is actually directed to Nish. And the question is, what factors influenced your decision to forego pursuing a PhD? And do you think that anything would have been different if you had decided to obtain one versus, going the path that you've gone down now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the work that interested me and the problems that I wanted to solve called on pursuing the path that I did. I think trying to figure out how to best streamline collaborations between institutes or figure out what it takes to bring algorithms to widespread adoption, those problems would only be possible in an industry role. We actually thought a lot about how we could stay in academia and still pursue what we wanted to do. But that was analogous to building and maintaining a PAX company within an academic setting. Like there are tasks that are better suited for academia, and there are tasks better suited for industry. And the problems that I wanted to solve and the tasks that I needed to do fell very strictly within the things that were possible within an industry. So I never had to consciously make a decision whether it was going to be academia versus industry. There was only one option for me. And so I think that also answers the other question that you posed. I can't imagine doing what I'm doing in academia today. It just wouldn't be something that would be academically valuable. It is only something that industry would value right now.
Thank you. So the next question will be directed at Sarah. As you mentioned, you have mentored many students from diverse backgrounds, and including medicine, engineering, and bioinformatics. What projects have you worked on in the past that have translated to your current work?
Yeah, so speaking specifically about projects that I've worked on in the past, translating to my current work. So really my postdoc project really was a building block and stepping stone, I guess, in terms of my independent research program. So I think that feels really my PhD or my postdoc work focused on PET-CT for lung cancer and traditional more radiomic analysis. And really this allowed me really to build collaborations both within Stanford and take that and kind of build new directions as part of my own independent research program. So not only still maintaining the collaborations at Stanford, but developing new collaborations at other institutions and kind of using that as preliminary data to get collaborators on board locally. So I think that was really important to be able to show some of our radiologist colleagues here locally in London to see what we've done and get them on board to kind of now let's curate our local database here. Let's build some new research questions and kind of build off from that. So I think that's kind of important in terms of the past work, kind of building into my future work.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I had one question for Yuhao as well. So Yuhao, you already touched on it kind of quickly, but you had quite a success in the academic realm when you published a few papers. What made you what was the main thing that made you decide not to stay in academia and do a postdoc and then go to industry?
I think first of all, I would like to say that that's an overstatement. So I wouldn't use the word success. I think I was really lucky during my PhD to be able to work with great mentors like Kurt or some other great collaborators. So I think that gives me the opportunity to publish. But I would say that there's so many more people that have been way more successful than I did. So that's the first thing. So in terms of the transition, I think there are mainly two considerations or mainly two reasons that I want to make that, or maybe three. Let me touch the first two. So the first one is about the work, the scope of the work that I do. So I think in industry, so at the end of my PhD, I really want to get exposed to real applications and real customer and to build real applications. So I feel like during my PhD, even though I was able to publish a lot, I built new models, and get new numbers on things and try to see how that improves medical imaging, for example. I always kind of doesn't have the feeling that I was actually talking to real customers or real users of the algorithm that I actually built, right? There's a lack of that type of feeling in the academic research environment that I was in. So so I think being in industry gives me that opportunity to actually talk to real customers and see the real feedback on the actual product that I built. So that's the first reason that I want to get exposed to the industry environment. And it's why that is actually very attractive to me by the end of my PhD. The second reason is actually resource. So I think Curtis here, maybe I shouldn't say too much about this, but I always have this feeling during my PhD that actually this is a generic issue nowadays for academic versus industry, is that in academics, especially like if you're working on like machine learning, right? So you need a lot of computational resource to build new models and to make them good. But I think in academia, it's really hard to get a good amount of this computational resource, right? So, but in industry, because it's built on a totally different incentive. We have a lot of resources that can be allocated to research projects like this. So I can access a lot of these resources. So I think that's another factor that has driven my decision, which is a very practical reason. So a third reason that I think I should also mention is that I also already mentioned this in some of the previous questions, is that I want to be exposed to more industries. For my PhD, I was mainly solving NLP and especially medical NLP, so applying NLP and imaging to medical problems. But I think being at the current position actually exposed me to more industries like finance or some other industries, and to see the problems in those different industries. So I think that's another reason why I decided to make the transition. Yeah. Hope that answers the question.
It more than answers the question. Thank you. And so the final question I'd like to pose is, I'm actually going to direct this question both to Akshay and to Mirabela. So you get a paired targeted question, which is a slight variation on the question that we had come up with as a panel, because after hearing both of you speak, I think we're very curious as to like the non-traditional paths that you both took. So, Akshay, you did your training here at Stanford and then ultimately stayed on with as a faculty, which is an incredibly impressive accomplishment. And Mirabela, you had the opportunity to work in industry and then come back to academia, which is equally rare and impressive. So I wanted to ask both of you, in taking those paths, what were the biggest challenges that you faced in terms of coming into your academic post? What did you feel was maybe unique about your pathway as a junior faculty relative to other people who maybe took a more traditional path? And also, what were some advantages that you thought emerged from the pathway that you took? So either of you are welcome to respond.
Maybe I can start. I think, and I cannot talk on behalf of the people that decided to hire me. Some of them are here, so I don't know exactly what was in their minds when they make this decision. But I do think that the fact that I had a little bit of industry experience helped, because I have that. I can share that with some of you, the trainees that are in my team and then in the division. So I think there is a perspective. It's clear that in this day and age, not everybody's going to stay in an academic position, and understanding and having the knowledge about how the industry works, I think, is valuable in a professor position as well. I think that's one. Now, the challenges is that I think at a certain moment, somebody had to trust in me that I will achieve the things that an academic will achieve, although I was coming from industry where I was not coming with an NIH grant, or I was not coming with other things that could have been a plus for an academic position. So I don't know if that was personally my challenge, but I had to prove myself that I can do the things that an academic needs to do while coming from industry, which is write grants, be successful in writing papers again, and all of those. So I think that's kind of how I think. But personally, I think having the experience of the industry has only opened my eyes towards kind of what is possible in industry, what resources are available. I think if you work at AWS, might be a bit different in computational resources compared to if you work at GE. But just, differences, right? They're always going to be there. And so I think I never seen it as a challenge. So personally, I saw it only as an advantage. But yeah, Akshay.
Yeah, if I had to take a stab at that, I think that's a pretty tough question. But from a challenge perspective, I guess one of the bigger challenges that I probably faced was not having a track record of NIH funding. I had plans of applying to a K-99 grant. I had plans on applying to even a postdoctoral fellowship grant, but just the timing of the faculty positions came up in a time when I hadn't done any of that. So just trying to have a compelling enough case that, as a faculty, you're almost hired to be able to get new grant funding into the university. And the best way you can show that you're capable of doing that is by having shown that you've done that in the past. So I think that was a little bit of a challenge, but something that helped me is, again, my mentor. Even though at Stanford, I didn't have the ability to apply to grants as a PI internally, my PIs were always very supportive of me applying to different funding opportunities that came on campus, 50K grant here, 100K grant over there. Most of them were unsuccessful. But just the fact that I was able to start thinking about that process and starting to write grants, and there were one or two grants that were successful, and even though they were never in my name as PI, I think my mentors were very kind in, writing that in the letters of my recommendation, saying, even though, my PI has a grant, Akshay wrote most of it, and Akshay carried out the project. So I think that was a challenge, but I think because of the mentorship structure that existed at Stanford, I was able to work around that. So maybe advice to all your trainees is talk to your PIs about, what are potential opportunities that you could get involved with. And then from the unique opportunity standpoint, I think I really benefited from trying to take ownership on the problem entirely. Over my PhD and some of my early postdoctoral work, I was working on some new medical imaging modalities for rapid MR imaging of the knee. So not only was I able to build the new imaging method, I deployed it in the clinic, and I was able to talk to clinicians. I was in the reading rooms, and by the end of the day, I could read maybe 80% of all knee MR scans that came into the hospital. Those are mostly normal, and I think the radiologists get paid for the other 20% that are abnormal. But I think that's something that's unique about academics, where you get to talk to so many different skill sets and then all co-located next to each other. I think that was a really big feather in my cap, that I had the opportunity to be able to work with so many different faculty to own my problem from end to end. So I thought that was pretty helpful for me.
Maybe I can follow up one thing that came to my mind as Akshay was saying these things. One of the things that was a little bit challenging for me actually coming to this position is that I couldn't really bring any of my postdoc projects per se into the new position. One, because I left that job, and two, because I also wanted to, or I needed to establish my own collaborations locally. So I started really, really from scratch, which I think probably if you look at my record, at least in the first year of my faculty position, I also couldn't hire too many people. So I wouldn't say I struggled, but at least my productivity was not on paper as I would have liked it to be, or at least as it should have been. So I think this transition also can probably hurt me a little bit, as opposed to if I would have come directly from a postdoc. But at the same time, it pushed me towards finding my own collaborators and my own direction, which I think it's also important.
Thank you. This is all great advice, and I'm so happy it's all recorded so we can watch it back at some point. And I think it's super useful for all the trainees on the call, and including me, of course. So at this moment, we would like to open the floor for questions. I didn't see that much questions in the chat yet, but you can just raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask the question if you want to. I'm sure there are a ton of questions.
The good news is that there are a lot of very helpful comments in the chat, albeit no questions. So maybe we should save the chat at some point as well, so everyone can have this as a resource. And maybe we'll just take a few moments of pause here to see if the audience has questions, but if not, that just gives Rohir and I the joy of continuing to ask you all more questions. So anything from the audience?
I see a question that Kurt had asked, which setting, I believe we're talking about industry and academia, has the resources that you need to succeed and to solve problems?
Thank you. So that's an excellent question that we definitely missed. So open to anyone on the panel who'd like to start.
I'm happy to give my quick 2 cents, but I'll stop talking very quickly.
And just to clarify, it was a little bit rhetorical in the sense that I felt like that was something that a point that Yuhao was making, was that you need to ask yourself that question as you're making your career decisions. But I'd be interested to hear what you all have to say about it.
Yeah, I guess I was struck by what Yuhao was saying, and maybe I'll disagree a little bit to spice up the conversation. I think, at least as we're talking about machine learning, a lot of the algorithms that we're all trying to build can be pretty compute intensive. And we always talk about that, companies can build big models effectively. And I think that's a benefit that the industry has. But I think at the same time, that presents an opportunity for academics also. I know that I'm never going to train GPT-3, and I will never try to do that, or I'll never try to train large models. But I think that allows me to have a little bit more creativity in trying to build new theory or in trying to build new use case settings where I can evaluate the robustness of these methods. And that's not something that I would be working on if I just had a lot of compute where I might be able to solve bigger problems. So I think just because one side has more compute and another side has less compute, that doesn't preclude opportunities. I think it just provides different problems and different arenas one can exist in. And I actually like working in a small data regime. I feel like that helps me build more robust algorithms, helps me come up with more creative ways of solving problems rather than just throwing a lot of data and compute at it. And obviously, not everyone has to agree with that, but at least that is how I sleep better at night.
Yeah, I think that's a great addition to actually my answer. It's a kind of, I think when I say that, it was mainly like from my personal reason, like why I choose industry. But I think that's a great point, actually. So just think about the example of GPT-3, right? So it's a powerful natural language processing model that's amazingly good at doing like all the benchmark tasks. But I think the problem with that is, if we look at industry has the incentive of building a model that large and being like very, very accurate at specific tasks, but it doesn't have enough incentive to understand why that model works. And also like to try to make that model more robust, probably like try to interpret why the model makes certain decisions. And on the other hand, in an academic environment, because we're doing research purely out of curiosity, I think the incentive is actually very different. So you have the very kind of good environment or the right motivation to delve into problems that sometimes the industry would not have the incentive to do, right? So I think that's a great point to add on top of my answer previously. Yeah, so I totally agree with the point.
Any other comments from our other panelists? If not, I think Stefania has her hand up, so please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. So I wanted to say, first of all, thanks for all the great answers for everybody. And I see a common thread we saw here in all the panelist answers is this really moving freely with what your interest is. And I wanted to ask, do you feel we need to dispel the myth a bit about academia being rigid? Because I think very often we have this, like people don't feel they have to stick with a certain project or a certain direction, or they feel that it's taboo to ask about this like industry collaborations or connections. And I think this panel has been great at showing otherwise. But yeah, I wanted to ask if you ever felt in your career transitions this part of resistance to flexibility.
Maybe I can try to answer that one. I feel like there is always a little bit of, when you are in academia, sometimes people like PIs and mentors might not necessarily want a trainee to go or might not necessarily want the trainee to go in certain paths. I personally felt that there was a little bit of resistance when I left my postdoc to go to industry, as in I've been told that might not be necessarily the best career move that I have or I will do. And I kind of chose a little bit to ignore some of this. I think I had the same resistance, if you want, also from my PhD to move into a postdoc. That was not the field of my PhD. I kind of choose to ignore them. It is your own path. And while people might have good intentions, it's your path. And my thought process has always been, it's my path, so I'll choose to do whatever I feel like it's the best for it. And kind of a little bit in that direction. I felt like I was a little scared, and maybe goes a little bit that I might burn some bridges by doing that, essentially taking that. And I can say successfully that I have not burned those bridges. I think people respected me for my decisions, although they might have not agreed with them at all times. But
that's an awesome answer. Thank you.
And I do think coming from industry understands a lot that people move between jobs quite easily. So I think from industry, I didn't got like the same, if you want, resistance, because I think there was no expectation or it was, it was certainly more common to move across companies.
Can I have a quick comment on that question too? Take my answer with a grain of salt, because I've only really seen this at Stanford, but I actually don't think that the research environment here is rigid at all. I think there's a lot of free flow between multiple different divisions, different departments. And what I would suggest is being able to make use of your trainee status. So if there is a new professor in CS or electrical engineering or genetics that you are interested in their research, but you don't necessarily have that background, feel free to email them and say, hey, I'm a new postdoc at Stanford, or I'm a new PhD student at Stanford. These are some skills that I bring in, but this is what I'm interested in. And try to show that you're eager and willing to learn. And from a value perspective, try to show them that you can also contribute to their research. So I think trainees have a really nice excuse to be able to just reach out and use the new student card. In fact, I use that with different faculty all the time too, and I'm pretty sure that will start wearing off quickly. I email other faculty and say, I'm a new assistant professor on campus. I'd love to chat about your research. So I think people are always willing and open to listen and to consider new ideas. They're busy, admittedly, but I think they'll always try to find the time to try to explore these new bridges, at least at Stanford.
Yeah, thank you for that, Akshay. And I agree, Stanford is really wonderful at this whole thing. I'm also an example. My PhD is in applied physics, and I found Mirabela's lab. And yeah, it's all very nice to be able to explore this. So yeah, I think the takeaway is take advantage of Stanford. It's a really cool place to explore interests.
Excellent. We're almost on the end of the session. So there's room for one more question. I see Anthony has his hand raised. So feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for the interesting discussion. So two comments kind of to prelude my question. So one, most people here we either have faculty or we have industry, which is interesting. And then the other thing I noticed, as Akshay was commenting, he kind of talked about liking that whole life cycle. So from his research all the way to hanging out with radiologists and understanding how we can implement the technology he developed and whatnot. So I'm curious, and we sometimes see, and maybe more in figureheads often, people who kind of more toe the line, they actually have a foot in academia and in industry. Does anyone have any comments on kind of, or thoughts on the reality of actually being able to do that, or how it may work to actually be a little bit of playing a role in academia and doing the research, and it maybe actually implementing it in a company or whatever. Yeah, I'll let anyone comment that has any thoughts on that, my vague question. Maybe barriers to it or whatnot.
I'll pick on Nish to answer that because he did that really well.
Yeah, I think I'm fortunate to be in a position where I interact with a lot of academics. We work mostly with academic health centers who build algorithms, and then we do the tasks that they find boring, and they do the tasks that we are not best equipped to do. So it's a very nice complementary set of skills. I think it leads to a pretty virtuous cycle of interests and skills and tasks, actually, whereby when researchers realize that, hey, there's this mechanism for us to actually see algorithms achieve widespread adoption, then they think about what would lead to most clinical impact and try to build algorithms that are in that light of things. Similarly, when we see what's new in the market in the sense of, okay, there are pre-trained algorithms and foundational models are picking up. So like, can we actually incorporate them and think about how that might influence the new set of algorithms that might be developed? So I think that industry and academic collaborations are best, in my experience, when they complement each other and not so much overlap each other. And I've been fortunate to be at that on that front.
Perfect. Well, with that, I believe we've reached the close of our session. In fact, we're a minute past. So I would just like to thank all of our panelists once again for sharing your stories and your immense wisdom with us today. And so maybe a virtual round of applause for for everyone on the panel.
Make
and
it real.
Make it real. Everybody unmute and let's give them a nice hearty round of applause. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience members for your participation. So that closes our panel discussion. Thank you.